Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lisa Koenigsberg. I'm the founder and president of Initiatives in Art and Culture, and delighted to welcome you all to our first monthly webinar of the 2021-2022 season. And fittingly, we are starting with another installment, if you will, in a series that has been called Words Matter. And today, the topic we're tackling is trust. And I can't think of a better group of people to address this topic. And I'm just going to go clockwise by what I see on the screen. Rob Bates, who is the news director at JCK and someone we read every day. Also a novelist by the books. Suki Cooper, who is executive director of precious metals at Standard Chartered. And I hope I got that fully intact. Tiffany Stevens, who is president and CEO of the Jewelers Vigilance Committee, which is most commonly, I think, known in shorthand as JVC. And then Mark Hanna, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Richline. So we have a full range of perspectives here. And to start out this conversation, what I thought would be useful would be to ask each of our panelists in their personal professional lives, what seem to be the major issues surrounding trust as they go about their daily pursuits, each of which contributes to our collective well-being. So I'm going to say, Mark, would you start?
Sure. Since I'm the longest in the career here by far, by about 20 years, I think probably the real important moment for me in my jewelry industry career was back in about 2006, so it's not that long ago, when it became really evident that corporations, major retailers, and we had one major customer in particular, who were really looking for supply chain transparency, really looking for the clarity of what we really did and what the parts of our supply chain really did from a human rights point of view, from a conflict minerals point of view. And I think that all brought into focus for me that, there's a very important part of our business responsibility. And that responsibility extended to the ethics of every place we touched, all the communities we dealt with. And it's a pretty daunting moment when you realize that you feel you've been doing the right thing all the way along and you're a good company, you're good people, but now you're going to really pay hyper sensitive attention to every part of that so that you can report it, so that you can talk about it, so that you can talk to every member of that chain and say, hey guys, this is our family values and you got to adhere to our family values or you don't get to have dinner at the table tonight. So, for me, that's been very important. And I think it's really directionally changed, my own feeling from my own career, certainly my passions. And it really, the number one word with all that is you tell the truth all the way through the exchange. You're transparent about everything you do, everything you don't do, and you begin to create relationships that are based first and foremost on trust.
Rob, from a sort of journalistic perspective, what do you think, especially as sort of one of the authoritative voices in the jewelry world?
Well, I would say a couple things. I mean, JCK, I'm very lucky to be at JCK. It's been around for 150 years. Mark, I'm going on 30 years, so you may not be that much ahead of me. I'm not 100% sure. Um, I think, you know, JCK in a way, it's kind of a community newspaper in a way, kind of like a local newspaper in a small town in a way, and that we are kind of part of the community, but we also report on the community. And we're also, you know, again, I've been doing this for a while, so you develop, I hope, a certain trust from your readership, and you work very hard to get things right and to, you know, at the same time make it interesting and compelling and worth reading. I mean, the ethical issues in the jewelry industry have shifted, and this is going, you know, since what I do in a way, you know, it overlaps. I'm really part of two industries. I mean, I've never worked for a jewelry company. I've only worked for publishing companies, but the overlapping issues of trust in the jewelry industry have changed dramatically, where for a while, like when I started, like I remember there was kind of a controversy over a site holder selling an I-1 stone, how that was a terrible thing for them to do. And, you know, selling boxes direct, those were the kind of, and selling things without disclosure, those are the big ethical issues. And things like, you know, how this industry impacts people on the ground, people in foreign countries, were not talked about so much. They were talked about a little bit, but not so much. But what's happened over the years is the world's gotten smaller. So whereas a retailer in New York or the middle of the country might previously not have much of engagement with Africa, right, where the jewels come from, or Latin America or wherever, now everything has gotten smaller, right? And the world's gotten smaller and there's more communication. So these things matter more. How people on the ground in all these places matter more. And that's become a big issue as far as Mark was saying, as far as sourcing and ethics and trying to learn where your materials come from. And this is partly driven by consumers. I don't think it's a huge movement, but I think it's more of a, in a way, kind of a damage control movement, in that you want to avoid, you know, getting involved with something that's not good. And when you do something that you're proud of, you want to be able to say it. And I think right now, consumers have unlimited choices. When I graduated from, let's say, high school or college, you know, if I still lived in New Jersey, there would be maybe 3 jewelers in town, and I would go to them. Now I can buy jewelry from any place. Not only can I buy jewelry, I can buy just about anything in the world, right? Just right now, even during the seminar, I can do it, right? I can buy almost anything in the world. So people in this kind of situation, people think, well, where do I want to put my money? And I want to put my money, especially with a world so screwed up and such a mess, as you know, the world always is. People want to put their money in places that are doing good, and they certainly want to avoid places that are doing bad. And you know, that's been a big revelation over the last couple of decades, how certain things are produced, how certain things are mined, and you know, conditions in factories. And these are things that weren't talked about so much. They were talked about, but you know, they would kind of come out a lot. And now I think it's not like, well, I don't know where they come from, it's not my problem. Now it is your problem. Now it is something that you have to take a certain responsibility for. And I think that's a large part of the trust issue. And I mean, what is scary is that, you know, one little mess up can really ruin your reputation. You know, the social, because people have so many choices, like the social media world is very unforgiving, certainly. And, you know, whether that makes a long-term difference is one thing, but I think companies have to be very, very careful, and sometimes perhaps they're a little too careful on about how they conduct themselves in this new era, because there's a light shining on them that there perhaps wasn't before, and they're under more scrutiny than they were previously.
So I think it's a great moment to segue to Suki, because of course banking, the concept of trust is absolutely critical. And so we're delighted to have you. And I wonder if you can speak to, from a personal and, you know, professional perspective, how you feel that either this concept has shifted or there's greater emphasis, you know, how the bank is pursuing securing trust.
I've been in the precious metals markets now for the past 2 decades, and in my role as a precious metals analyst, I view it as a privilege and an honor to be able to speak to different clients around the world, across the supply chain, from those who are producing the metal to those who are fabricating or manufacturing items with the metal, through to those who are the end consumers, and those who are storing or investing in the metals, such as central banks or private investors, jewelry fabricators. So it's really eye-opening to be able to see gold, platinum, palladium, silver, rhodium going through that supply chain from origin to end use. But I also have the privilege to be able to speak to clients around the world from various different countries across Asia, Europe, Africa, and the US. So I think that across this time period, I've also realized, although it's a big world, it's also a very small world. And one of the great things about precious metals is that those who are involved in the market tend to stay in the market for a long time. So you tend to build long-term relationships. And I think that's one of the great aspects about this market, the fact that you are dealing with the same people on a more frequent basis. So there's a huge amount of trust, and it's a privilege to be able to share market views and outlooks to help people to make those decisions that they need to make to be able to manage their businesses. So I think that trust is pivotal throughout these conversations, whether it was from my early days through to where we are now. And I think the focus on trust has certainly increased. But I also see it on my day-to-day basis when just preparing the data, preparing our reports, there's a lot of trust in the data that I will use as well. I'm obviously not on the ground counting the answers as they come out. So there's a reliance on those who are in the field and are collecting this data to be able to pass on good quality data, so others then can make good decisions based on how much supply there is in the world, or what constraints there are, or where the supply chain blockages are. So trust is very important, and I'd say it has evolved to become more of a focus.
And Tiffany, from your perspective, I mean, you are you hold the fate of many in your hands, in the sense that you are the advocate for the industry and also the advisor to all of us regarding vocabulary, terminology, and and that has huge impact. So I'm wondering what you feel from your perspective, particularly with the announcement that the jewelry guides are going to be re-examined, etc., or perhaps that isn't as pivotal, but tell us what you're.
Sure. Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you to my fellow panelists. It's great to be with you today. So at the JVC, we're lawyers primarily, and so we come into this with a pre-existing condition of sorts of being lawyers and having a professional responsibility to live up to certain standards in order to do our jobs and to retain our licenses. And sort of doubling that with our role within the jewelry industry, we live with these issues every day. And just like you said, interpret them and make them come to life for our industry. And that, that's inside the industry, like B2B along the whole supply chain. But really why we exist is to maintain and nurture these issues so the consumer will retain and grow their trust for our industry and for our products. So it's something that we grapple with every day, and it certainly is evolving as well. And I love what Rob said about the sourcing issues and how those are really, really coming to life and at warp speed, which is great. So yeah, I mean, we deal with these issues every day, whether it's through advertising to consumers or the way that people do business along the supply chain. We give lots of advice. We do some small p policing of the industry as well. So we really get inside of these topics. Additionally, to be part of our community, you have to apply, and we actually manually approve everyone looking at issues just like this, looking at how people are behaving in the marketplace and what their reputations are before they're allowed to join our community. And if we find evidence that people have breached that trust, we will eject them from our community because we want membership to mean something. Yeah, I mean, additionally, it's just something that we're working on all the time. And I think that a lot of us have our own, you said personal, our own visions and feelings about what is and isn't trustworthy just as human beings. And I think that instinct is really important. And some of the most successful people in our industry have that instinct very strongly. And that's why they're so successful. They know who to trust and who not to trust. But I think what's really needed, especially as things are evolving, are practical tools and structure that everyone can fit into and that we agree on, that we can all slot into and agree that we're in sort of a trust environment by implementing these tools. And that's one of the things that we're super engaged in, building those tools and distributing those tools that already exist to our industry.
Well, all of these perspectives are a fabulous lead into the next topic of conversation that I'd like to bring up, which is the role of technology and the relationship that it plays to trust. And that can mean that these elements erode trust or they increase and sustain trust. And each of you deal with these things on a daily basis. And I wonder, Suki, perhaps you'd like to start with this question.
In terms of the precious metals markets, and I think the way investors are viewing gold in particular, they do look to gold as a collateral in some instances. It may be looked at as a way of diversifying a portfolio as against hedging against uncertainties, whether that's geopolitical uncertainties, whether that's a fear that interest rates might be cut or inflation might spiral much higher. So I think there's a lot of trust in gold being a hedge and being an asset that can protect against some uncertainty. But of course, there's some concerns around where that gold is sitting or how you store that gold. And when we think about trust, obviously there are trusts as well. And when we think about physically backed ETFs, that is metal that is held in a trust. And that metal is audited and each of those bars are allocated. So we know which metal is being held in the vault back in that ETF. But this has been a significant change in the market. Previously, when investors wanted to gain access to gold, they would have to go out and buy small bars, perhaps coins, maybe buying it in jewelry form. And not every single country has jewelry hallmarking. But having a physically backed ETF where metal is held in trust allows investors to gain access to the gold market with greater confidence. It's a more liquid market. They can trade it much more quickly, just the way you would trade shares. They can gain exposure and redeem exposure very quickly. But also, when we think about how technology is being used across the precious metals market, it's not just in the development of products. We've seen in various countries, like such as China and India, the transactions are now conducted over various apps where and a piece of jewelry can be verified for its quality, and a price can be placed on that, and it can be recycled very quickly, can be placed in an envelope, sent back to somebody who can recycle it, and then the transaction can be completed much more quickly. So we're also seeing much more technological developments when it comes to trying to verify where this gold has come from, to be able to follow it through the supply chain. And this is something that the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association, has been working on as well, trying to look at how they can use developments in blockchain technology to be able to verify where that gold came from. And it gives end users confidence as well that they can be able to verify its origins. So there are lots of different methods at the moment, lots of different avenues that are being explored in the way technology can be used to either make precious metals and jewelry more accessible to consumers, or being used to be able to make those transactions much easier and accessible to more people, and also just being used in terms of being able to verify where that metal came from, and to be able to increase transparency in the market, and to be able to have confidence on who is on the other side of that transaction.
That's a natural segue to you, Mark. But before we do that, I want to jump in and say something I've been remiss about. And that is, we welcome your questions early and often. And when you are viewing this webinar, to your right, there is a box into which you can type your question and then email it in. Those questions, there is going to be 15-20 minutes at the end of this for questions. So but one thing about technology is that it is not utterly instantaneous. So please don't hold on to your questions, let them out and just keep them coming. So with having said that, from Suki's comments on ETFs, trust, and going on to blockchain, I like to turn to Mark because I think that's quite a logical segue.
Yeah, I think anybody knows me knows that if it's new technology, I can't learn enough about it. So, and one of the most recent ones obviously has been blockchain and its ability to very democratically and thoroughly create a path with transparency, with detail, with honesty for products, for pretty much anything that you want to apply to it. And don't confuse it with cryptocurrency. It's really the foundation for blockchain is really the foundation for cryptocurrency, but two totally different animals there in terms of what happens with that technology. But I think more importantly, I want to, Rob hit a really important point that to me, the most important technology affecting all industries and very much affecting trust is just the interconnectivity, the hyper connectivity that the internet and all the tools and everything have brought to us. And that, it kind of joke sometimes about it's a first world problem when our internet doesn't work right. But that connectiveness probably is the single most important thing, because in a hyper-connected world, you need to be hyper trustworthy. You need to be hyper honest, that anybody can find out anything. Everybody can talk to everything. Everybody can talk to everybody. What you do, it spreads permanently. It spreads immediately, and it never goes away. It's permanent. So I think that this connectivity that sometimes we take for granted is by far the most important ingredient in generating the need for trust, the policing of trust, the ability to gauge that what you say is what you do. And that may be eventually that most important common denominator, where that connectedness requires trust, that you're not going to connect in any vehicle or with anybody without that trust. It's to me, one of the most underestimated things, because we take it for granted every day, but one of the things that without question is governing this new world of trust and this new economy of trust and this new economy of responsible practices.
Rob, what do you think about that?
I pretty much agree. I don't think it's all positive. I mean, I think the internet has, in a way, it's created a whole new series of challenges, and it's made it a lot easier to rip people off in a lot of ways, and to scam people. And the internet makes everything more efficient, and it also makes scamming more efficient. So I don't necessarily. I think we are in an era where trust matters a lot more. Unfortunately, a lot of people break that trust and get away with it all the time, and it's unfortunate. I mean, I think technology is. I mean, we're at a time of tremendous disruption, and that disruption isn't fun in a way. Nobody wants to. If I'm eating dinner, I don't want people disrupting me, right? I want to eat my dinner, right? I want to watch if I'm watching a TV show, don't disrupt me. I mean, I think most people want to live their lives, and that makes things tough. And it's there's a lot of adjustments. So I think that. I would say that technology brings a whole new series of issues, of problems, of issues involving trust, involving so many things, and readjusting to this world, whether it's lab-grown diamonds or it's jewelry e-tail or it's social media. I mean, it's very different. Again, speaking for myself, the idea that I can write an article. When I started, I would write an article and it would come out 3 weeks later and I wouldn't get any feedback. Now I can write an article and I can get like 6 people angry at me an hour later, so it's the feedback loop is a lot more heightened and quickened. So it's kind of a fascinating time. Sometimes I wish the rate of change would slow down a bit. Mark said unstable internet, not getting internet is a first world problem. It keeps telling me my internet is unstable, so I'm having that first world problem this morning. But yeah, I mean, I think we have a whole new series of problems and issues, and certainly regarding journalism, and certainly regarding how communications and how people communicate. And since we've kind of gotten on this path of constant change, I don't know if we're ever going to kind of get to a equilibrium. I think people would like to kind of stop and catch their breath a little bit, but as that doesn't seem to be how it's working. I mean, it really is like the new industrial revolution, and everything I read about the industrial revolution said that was not all that fun a time. For a lot of people, unless you were one of the very wealthy. So that's it. I think it's really interesting. It's fascinating as a journalist to cover. Writing about jewelry for 30 years, what's interesting, or nearly 30 years, is that how much has changed, and there's always something new to cover in it. You never kind of get bored, and that's what really keeps it interesting. So it's I think technology has definitely enabled a lot of the issues that we're discussing right
now. Yeah, I just want to go back and just add to that I agree, Rob, that there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I do believe that the one filter, the most important filter, is generated trust. That there is nothing in my mind more important to companies, to individuals, to kids, to everyone, than from day one understanding that your trust, is your calling card. Your trust is that now most important thing, far more than it ever was, because there's so much distrust out there. So it becomes the most important filter in our dealings, interpersonal or business to business.
Yeah, I think trust it's what people expect it's kind of a new baseline. And, I think everybody's been burned to some extent by trusting people online, perhaps that maybe they shouldn't. And I think it's extremely important, especially with high profile companies and high profile brands and products and celebrities and people, certainly.
I'd like to throw something in before turning to Tiffany, which is I've actually would agree about the relationship between technology and trust. And it has deeply impacted us in the sense, and by us, I mean initiatives in art and culture, and therefore me, in the sense that during this pandemic period, we have had the great good fortune of launching these webinars. And so on a virtually daily basis, and certainly every month, we have a sense of accountability to you. And the importance of not earning really, but maintaining and being worthy of your trust. And that trust is not linked with respect to these webinars to a monetary exchange. And that is one of the most interesting things about trust, which is that it is beyond price, and yet it is earned. And so having said that, and thanking everyone for the opportunity to be with you every month as we are, I'd like to turn to Tiffany because technology is, if you will, a double-edged sword. And one of the things that the JVC does is, for example, look at social media claims being made, which could extend to disinformation campaigns. And I wonder, what your thoughts are on technology.
Sure.
And even surveillance and technology.
Sure. So I agree that it's a double-edged sword, certainly. I think all of us are in a new dimension more than we can even comprehend right now with technology, and especially those of us who lived during the 20th century. And I think there are extreme upsides to that, which we've explored. One of them being a total sea change in gatekeeping in institutions in general, and certainly in our industry, when you think about who was trustworthy or who got to be in the very small circle of trading goods, that has become a much more diverse area now because of technology and the ability for players who have been underrepresented or not represented at all to enter the market, which is really exciting. But it completely transforms the idea of who is trustworthy, what they look like, where they live. And we've seen, to support this at the JVC, we've seen some different people try to create technology platforms to mirror the trust that used to be generational between families in our industry, for example. And I think that we will see much, much, much more of that. But it does bring up when we move from the human interaction that is by nature limited to a more inclusive, hopefully democratic trading of goods around the world, it does bring in this tension of fraud on the one hand, and also surveillance and privacy issues on the other. And that is, those are both things that we see as major issues and that we see playing out day to day at the JVC with our members here in the US and our friends around the world. I would say one of the biggest issues that we're facing here in the US, and Rob will probably agree with me on this, is what's going to happen with Section 230 here in the US. Right now, a lot of these platforms are considered neutral sort of town squares, and basically anything goes. One thing we see at the JVC is people will completely just cut and paste, like absolutely just copy another company's website with all their goods and prices and everything, and put it on, let's say, like an Etsy or an eBay, and take orders. And like, God knows what they're shipping to these consumers who think they're buying from someone else. And the way the law works now, there's really nothing to be done about it. So that's just one example of the fact that the marketplace is more open, but what that invites in terms of fraud and violations of trust, certainly, intellectual property and other factors. So I don't know if that answers your question, Lisa. Feel free to follow up if it doesn't.
I think it does in a very interesting way. Actually, I was really stunned about the, if you will, the copying of sites. I want to probe a little bit more, if I may, and that is to, let's see, how can we raise issues without necessarily getting into a political fest here. But the use of communication to spread, if you will, disinformation.
Sure.
And, whether that's about the nature of something being cultured as opposed to lab grown, or whether it has to do with corporate information or regulations.
Yeah, certainly now that we're all, I mean, especially in the last year and a half, now that we all are like completely addicted to our phones, and this is how we're getting all of our information, it really behooves a company or an individual who wants to be mischievous to just get it out there, because there's really no way to get it back. And even if you get a fine, right, it's, for some people, it's worth it. So it is a very Wild West moment on disinformation of all types. Much of it life and death, but for our industry also, like, people are making all kinds of wild claims on so many platforms and have instant access to millions of people. And it's really difficult to then claw that back, A, and B, re-educate. So we've seen, we work with the FTC constantly, and we understand that they're getting fund. You might have seen the news, they're going to get some more funding, and we hope, we anticipate that they'll be ramping up enforcement, and that'll be our way of trying to push back against that very real reality.
So this is a wonderful sort of transition to questions related to transparency, because how important and how is the emphasis on transparency, some of which is, you could say, engendered by technology, but how is the emphasis on transparency changing this? When I say industry, I always feel that I'm constraining the number of voices. So please understand that I mean everything from sourcing all the way to finished goods and intellectual property. So Mark, I guess perhaps.
Yeah, I think that I'd start with that my feeling is that transparency is probably the most innovative and disruptive thing to come out of the social media age. That obviously for businesses, we've adopted transparency, and as Rob said, this is just the beginning in terms of much more aggressive approaches to what we do, how we do it, who we do it with. It's becoming a must. And one of you guys referred to millennial generation, that absolutely with this generation, transparency is something they've grown up on and they believe in. So it came out of the social, but I think that each one of us in our daily lives, but more importantly in this context for corporations, you really have to be formulating a plan for your transparency in this age of transparency. You have to begin to look at what living in a glass house means to you, means to your associates, means to your a worldwide network of suppliers and so forth. And it just isn't something that you're going to be able to say, oh yeah, I can do that. I'll be transparent. It's a strategy. It's an important go forward dictum to you as a company to look at transparency in all of its various modes and meanings and adopt it. This is not going backwards.
Tiffany, a couple of things I wanted to ask you because this seems to relate. You've mentioned the issue of surveillance in a police state. How do we reconcile the notion of surveillance with the notion and a police state with the idea of transparency? And how do we get to the good that term suggests?
I wish I had the answer to that very important question that I think we're all grappling with right now. And this, I mean, it's such an interesting, we're all dealing with it across society, but it's such an interesting thing, I think, for our industry specifically, because I don't want to be too controversial, but like, right, transparency was not the goal of this industry just for sake of inter-industry competition. Nothing sinister, but just for the sake of keeping your suppliers a secret because you want the best deal or you want to protect your relationships. So it's an interesting conundrum for our industry specifically to be in this. And I think people are going to be slow to adapt after generations and generations of a completely different mindset to talking to each other, talking to the consumer about and being transparent. And then from the JVC perspective, one thing we are constantly educating everyone about is anti-money laundering. And basically that is an exercise in tracking and making not public, but sharing with the government and with your banking institution exactly what you're doing and who you're dealing with, and showing evidence of having followed up and made sure that you are correct about who you think you're dealing with. So it's definitely multifaceted, to use a pun. I think the surveillance state that we've all sort of found ourselves in is relevant for us too. And I think, again, not to, I'm always talking about AML, but not to bring up AML again, but we see our own government have the capacity to reach into lots of other countries to investigate and enforce corruption and terrorism, suspected terrorism, et cetera. And a lot of that could come back to our industry as well. So you're being sort of surveilled like any other citizen, but also you have in our industry extra scrutiny on top of that. So it's a really heavy time, I think, for these issues. And I would love to hear if other panelists had a more constructive answer to this really tangle of a problem.
I'd like to jump in. I mean, I think social media and online, I mean, in the end, they're tools, right? They're technologies. Just like the phone is a technology and the car is a technology, and you can use a phone, it's good. A car gets you somewhere. That's a good thing, right? But it can also run people over, So I think when all these tools came out, we were kind of led to believe that they'd be great and they would lead to this new spirit of interconnectedness and of openness and of transparency. And I think to some extent that's happened. To some extent it hasn't happened. I mean, I think there's so many companies, when I try to research them, there's no information on them. You can't tell who owns them. And it's just very frustrating that, obviously corrupt company can go out of business and then reinvent itself 2 months later online and buy a bunch of ads and sell. So I mean, that is very stressful. So I think in a way these tools are neutral in a way. I mean, they are tools, and people can use them for good and people can use them for evil, right? Just like diamonds and gold and all these things, they're all, in the end, they're all just objects. So, I think we have to say something like Facebook, which is so powerful. I mean, there was a Facebook post that got 700 comments about a jewelry piece, right? I don't think I've ever written a story that's gotten 700 comments. So if you think that most people who read the story don't comment, I mean, that you're talking about enormous reach of this particular post, right? And an enormous engagement. So, these tools are incredibly powerful, and I think they can be used for good, and they can be used for bad. And we have to just like anything, we have to make sure that we push them in the right direction.
Yeah, I just want to add to Rob's tools comment. Tools is right. And using blockchain, which there's not much more further advancements in technologically than blockchain right now. But there's a school of thought, the Ethereum blockchain platform, basically, that anything you do is open to the entire public. There's nothing private to you anymore. That if you're going to do it right, then it has to have the total public availability to see that information and judge that information. And the fact that when we were creating ours, we did it as a private permission system, where that was absolutely not the truth. This was not going to be available to everyone. And I was challenged on that at a Penn University of Pennsylvania webinar of that, we weren't really being transparent. We were kidding the world that we were transparent with this blockchain. So I told them that it's okay. You're right. And that we are delivering 3 bars of gold to my house at 27 Napton Street in Barrington, Rhode Island. It'll be there Tuesday up between 2 and 4 p.m. So you're right, Rob. All these tools, they all need, I'll use the filter word again. They all need filters. They're tools for us to do things better, to be more efficient. And they're not necessarily demanding that we just become an open book in every way. So everyone has to use these tools to their best efficient advantage.
So I'd actually like to throw in a question from someone in the audience right now before we then go to Suki on this question of transparency. Somebody says here, John Croston, I work with many small jewelry companies who do not know how a supply chain works. How do we get the word out that platforms like Alibaba are not platforms for a secure supply chain?
I guess you tell them and make your case. I mean, you communicate that message, and you show evidence of it. I mean, it's that particular thing is not that, I don't think that's that hard to prove, since you can go there in 2 seconds and see all sorts of nonsense. So I think you need to lay out the facts and let people make judgments. Unfortunately, we've seen many times in this industry where people can report, or we can report, that a certain company is unethical, and people will still do business with them. So there's not much you can do about that. But I think it's very, if something's frustrating you, I mean, address it head on. And I don't think the issues with Alibaba are a big secret. And I think it's a relatively easy case to make. So.
Okay.
Yeah, there's more and more emphasis, Lisa, on chain of custody. Chain of custody has become a very important phrase, throughout the industry. And just like know your counterparty, there may not be 2 more important concepts than the 2 of those. And as Rob says, each one has to manage their own, and each one has to be ready to disclose what they feel is relevant and appropriate. And this may be a big change from just trust me. But it's real and it can be done. And I think it's being done on a regular basis from
Yeah.
both the larger ends, like Responsible Jewelry Council, and the smaller ends, like Ethical Metalsmiths. I mean, I think that you really have a little bit of a perfect storm here about people paying attention to their supply chains and then being as transparent as they can and helping to generate you as a interested party, understanding the ethics and the certainty of what you're dealing with.
So let's go back to the material itself. Suki, when we were talking in preparation for this, one of the things that you mentioned, obviously a critical process, is hallmarking. And what about scenarios where there is no hallmarking, and what challenges does that present? Because obviously hallmarking is a critical issue. And then also wondering what in this new, more technological age is the equivalent of hallmarking as you deal with new products that may be a step away from the material itself.
I think if we think about hallmarking, it's been around for hundreds of years. It first originated in Europe, and we see it across many European countries, particularly in the UK, my home country. There you have 4 SA offices in Birmingham, London, Sheffield, Edinburgh, and each of them will certify the fineness, the purity, and they'll have a little mark that will tell you which office it was certified in as well, which office it was essayed in. So this really gives confidence and in the product that you are buying. And it's something that originated across mainland Europe and it has been picked up across various countries in Europe. And it helped to enable trade, and it helped to support transparency, helped to give confidence in the items that were being bought. We don't have the same assaying process in the US, but there are different ways that companies across the US will have a similar process to be able to either sell to Europe or to be able to sell with confidence to consumers in the US as well. But then there are other countries where there hasn't been any hallmarking for hundreds of years. And then we see some of the problems that have originated because there isn't that way of being able to independently verify and be transparent as to what a consumer is buying. And it's resulted in issues such as undercarriage, where the item that's being sold is not what actually is there, or where we have small businesses who are trying to not necessarily mislead consumers, but trying to have more undocumented trade, so that it's less obvious what they are selling. And then it's also undermined the global reach for that market as well. India isn't a huge producer of gold. It has a very small amount of gold, but it is a large recycler of gold, and it is a huge consumer. It's been a top 2 consumer of gold for the past decade. So it was limiting the market in terms of its growth prospects. And there was a great paper by the World Gold Council, I think it must have been the middle of the last decade, where it talked about some of these challenges and the fact that hallmarking was one way that a lot of these challenges could be addressed. And it was one way that trust could be established in gold, because gold in India is not just a piece of adornment, it's also an investment, how it would increase trust in gold as collateral. And there's the India market has gone to great lengths over the past few years to try and make the market more organized by developing a spot exchange, by developing hallmarking. So as of June this year, hallmarking was introduced, but it has several exemptions. So it's for a certain revenue level for the type of seller. It's for certain quality of gold. So it doesn't apply blanket across everywhere, but they are starting to introduce it. And the hope is that by introducing this hallmarking, it will help to add confidence to India's gold market. It will help to bring the international market into India's market and broaden their appeal, but also help to increase consumer confidence, whether it comes to export imports or whether it comes to international consumers wanting to buy products in India as well. So a lot of the products in India are very high carriage, 24 karat gold. So that this process is hoped that it will help to add to that. So there's a lot of there's a lot that can be done with hallmarking. That means that because it's an independent way of being able to verify what the product is, that it should help to grow the market and give confidence in that market. The other aspect I just want to touch upon when we think about transparency is the work that the London Bullion Market Association has done as well. We know that there are market makers who help to provide prices for the gold market, but we didn't necessarily have the volume of data in terms of how much gold was being traded each day and how large that spot market was. We have data when it comes to the futures market. We can see open interest data, we can see daily volume traded data, and the CFTC regulations allow us to see how which type of market participant is holding those positions as well. But the LBMA has done a tremendous amount of work in increasing the reporting around the trade flow that we see on a daily basis to help us to be able to quantify the size of the spot market as well. So there's lots of developments that we're seeing at the moment that are helping to add to the transparency of the market, to be able to build consumer confidence and to increase that trust as well.
And then there's our FTC. Oh, that's another webinar.
Well, it will be, but please feel free to take a plunge right at this moment.
What was that brand we used to have, 14 karat gold? I'm sorry, Tiff.
Or 18 or 22. Yeah. Well, that is indeed something, a topic to which we will return and look forward to doing so. One of the things that this emphasis on trust, the discussion of transparency and its importance brings up is, in a sense, where are we now? And I'm didn't intend to be punny, but then realized I was, so I'll just go ahead and say it, which is that there is a new word that has been coined, and that word is, I happen to love Steve Winwood and the song Higher Love. And so from trust, we go to trustability. And what is trustability, Mark? First off.
Yeah, I have to start by admitting I plagiarized this word a few years ago from a really great book called Extreme Trust by Don Peppers and Martha Rogers that deals really with the 21st century corporations' approach to doing the right thing for their customers and doing the right thing for the world and so forth. So I highly recommend that book. It's not new. It's probably 5 or 6 years old, but so I did steal that word from there. But really what trustability is a corporate culture, maybe more than anything else, a culture and a strategy of being proactive, being honest, being transparent, being straightforward. But I like the simplest way to look at it is that trustability is like having a true friend, and a true friend watches out for you, right? That a true friend is empathetic, is honest, and it's having all the qualities of a good friend in your business is really what trustability is about. You're establishing a profile that says we do the right thing. Right? We do the right thing by being competent. We do the right thing by paying attention to our customers. We do the right thing by paying attention to our global requirements. And then we also, not just do, sorry about that. Not just do we do things right, but we do the right things. So I believe it's a culture. I believe it's a process. I believe it's a mantra for you, your employees, your associates, and those people you do business with. And I love the word.
Suki,
Sorry about.
I think this is a wonderful point at which to turn to Standard Charter's initiatives, in effect, to if you will, be a better global citizen. And you spoke, for example, we talked about the vehicle on climate and some of the other initiatives that you're undertaking. And I wonder if you could talk about that, because it really does speak to trustability above trust, if you will.
Standard Chartered logo is here for good, and one of the wonderful aspects is that they, as a bank, we try to make a positive change in the communities that we trade in, that we are present in. So across Asia, Africa, there's lots of communities where we can do good. And so the bank has made a commitment in line with some of the UN goals towards net zero target emissions by 2030, and some of the goals are for 2040, but also helping to make those investments that are sustainable investments, those that will help individuals who want to invest to be able to make sure that their money can make a difference, whether it's climate change, or whether it's renewable energy, whether it's responsible mining. So there's lots of initiatives that the bank is focusing on, and its goals are aligned towards. So one aspect is reaching out to our clients to see how we can help them to make help achieve some of those goals. So some of those goals might be in line with what the carbon footprint might be, what your impact in terms of climate change might be. So there's I think the bank as a whole is trying to pivot the way it's focused in terms of its the outlook in terms of its investments towards greener technologies, towards renewables, and towards sustainable finance. So it's something that we're seeing across the industry as a whole. Consumers will want to have started to ask where that gold has come from, and as Mark has already mentioned, the way that blockchain can be used to be able to help to say where the origin of that metal was from. And then there are various mints or refineries that can help to process metal that only came from a certain mine. So that gives a greater confidence to the end consumer as to where that metal was sourced from. But also there are, if we think about the mining producers, they want to be able to make a difference as well. So many of them are turning to alternative sources for fuels, or they're at least starting to investigate where their energy can be derived from as well. So one of the aspects that I like about precious metals in particular is that its end use is not just as a bar sitting in a vault somewhere as an investment piece, or it's not just an item of adornment. It's also something that we can use in the world to make it a greener world. So something like platinum and palladium, they help to reduce the emissions from our vehicles. So the internal combustion engines that we are driving pretty much every day until we all switch to electric vehicles, it's helping to make a cleaner world. Things like platinum are used to try to come up with some cancer treatments. Silver is used in solar panels, it's used in wind turbines, so it's used in renewable energy. So these metals have such a wonderful use, whether it's renewables or whether it's water preservation, that it's really helping to make our environment a better planet for the generations ahead of us.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
I mean, I think there's a lot of things. I mean, I think the idea that you can sell something and not know how it was produced, under what circumstances it was produced, under what it took to get to your counter. That's, I mean, a lot of people still do it, but I think that is to some extent fading away. I think that if you sell something, you should stand by it, and you should stand by every aspect of it, including its production. And that is a relatively new concept. And I think it's part of the new transparency. I don't think everybody's holding it to it 100%. And, you know, I mean, one of the interesting things, I mean, Tiffany mentioned Section 230. I mean, you know, you have Amazon and eBay putting all sorts of garbage on their platform and not caring, and they have no responsibility. They claim they have no responsibility for it. And, you know, that's certainly could be an issue for them going forward. But I think certainly as a small jeweler who stands behind their product, that's something that is going to be a lot more important, that we not only think this is a beautiful piece at a great price, but we believe we like how it was produced and it didn't do any harm. The idea, I mean, the whole CSR thing is very, very, you know, it's so new, and it's so interesting that all these companies are now saying they're purpose-led. I mean, you know, I work for a company, Tiffany worked for a nonprofit, so she can say she works for a purpose-led organization, but most organizations are not purpose-led, they're money-led. And to be able to make that shift, right, is tough, right? It's not necessarily natural. And it's something that kind of, you know, has historically gone against what capitalism is all about, which is about just making money, right? So do you know, and I think, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, and how, you know, much of this, I mean, I'm sure everybody, you know, everybody's sincere, and, you know, I've talked to people at tons of companies, and I know they're very sincere. And I think, I think also another thing is what people perhaps underestimate is the consumer may not necessarily be demanding all this stuff, but I think people do, especially younger people, want to work for an organization that they're proud of and that aligns with their values. And I think that's something that, if you want the widest pool of talent possible, that's something that you have to think about. You know, we people want to work for an organization that they're proud of. They want to be proud of the work that they're doing. I mean, making money is all well and good, and we all try to do it, but, you know, at the end of the day, it's you know, we're leaving a planet that's kind of junked. So how do we do that in a more responsible way? I think it's and I think that's driving a lot of this. I think a lot of it's being driven internally, not necessarily externally. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, and we're going to have to wait and see how it all plays out. But you know, in the end, we have to all figure out, you know, where we stand in our new thing, and how we intend to help, you know, leave a positive legacy, all of us.
I have something to say to build on that. I'll make a bold statement, which is that I think in the next 10 years, all commercial activity will be viewed through the lens of climate change by the consumer. And I think we've seen a warp speed acceleration towards that already. And I think there are many people in the younger generation who feel that the trust between themselves and the older generation is broken, and that's the driver for their beliefs, which I think are much more passionate than some of us older folks. And I think this is a very real thing, and that we've had CSR around for a while, but I think it will, and it is moving from the philanthropy and marketing departments, which are obviously very important, but moving to the core business principles. And I think Suki demonstrated that beautifully with the illustration of what Standard Chartered is doing. and seeing it as just a core part of doing business. And with that comes data and hard facts on impacts. And I think people are going to be expecting that soon. And we see that, I'll tie this into back to the FTC. We see now that we know now that starting next year, the FTC is going to reevaluate what they mean in their green guides by responsible and sustainable and recycled and all this stuff. It's going to get redefined in the US. And they already require data to substantiate these claims, but we anticipate that these standards will become much more fierce, and that the expectation will be that this is a core part of your business and an essential part of trust.
Yeah, Tiff's exactly right. The next major issue we're going to deal with isn't conflict minerals. It's going to be climate and emissions and so forth. And thanks for the plug, Tiff. I'm actually hosting a webinar on this coming up in October 13th together with the World Gold Council and a couple other people on the impact of climate on the industry. But yes, this is going to be the next very important topic for us all to deal with.
Send us information, we'll plug it. But the other thing is to just add to that, one of the things I think that is really being addressed is, what is our future? Do we have a future? And the shift from, if you will, doing business with good as a byproduct or pursuing something with good as a byproduct to pursuing purpose with the economic yield as one of its products. And that speaks to the seismic shift, Rob, I think that you were addressing, and that quest for or the desire to have an impact, and the feeling that it's absolutely imperative that we do, because otherwise, what will we be? Where will we be? And I was going to ask you, Tiffany, but we're on such a high note here. What are some of the circumstances that have led to the focus on trustability, or to this, to find where we find ourselves thinking, if you will, beyond trust to trustability, almost, it's almost Eucharistic. And I wonder what you think are some of the factors that contribute to it. And of course, Rob as well, since you chronicle our world, how do we find ourselves here?
At the large corporation level, the importance of ESGs, the environmental social governance, cannot be underestimated. That both the SEC, New York Stock Exchange, EU, over the last few months are now looking to make your ESG reporting the equivalent of your financial reporting. And I know that this is talking about bigger, larger public corporations, but this is a very important, impactful statement. And in terms of the fact that we are now going to be judged as corporate America, are now going to be judged in every way by our social correctness, not just our financial agility. And undoubtedly, I think you guys all agree, the pandemic has really exacerbated this situation in so many ways. It certainly got everyone's attention on the global, the health of everyone globally and in the world, and what we can do about that. So yeah, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and the ESG movement is going to be very impactful.
I think that's right. And I think if I have to, I feel like I'm perhaps a little bit more, being a journalist, a little more perhaps jaundiced than some of the panel. But I think the question is, okay, now that corporations are embracing ESG, you're bringing money into it in a way, because you're kind of quantifying it as a monetary thing. And the question is, you're hoping that this movement will make the companies better, but you also don't want to get legitimate sustainability goals and ESG goals. You don't want them to be corrupted, and for these to be kind of performative exercises where people just meet a certain, buy offsets and declare themselves carbon neutral, and everything is dandy. You want something that's going to be a real change, and I think that's really the challenge here. Is, this is something that's could be a positive movement, but how do we prevent it from getting perhaps, I don't want to say corrupted, but how do we make sure that it reaches the goals that it is intended to reach? And I think that's the issue. And I hope the FTC is very thoughtful about how it does this, because you see, I was reading something that 60% of environmental claims have some form of greenwashing to them. I mean, it's crazy to me how when you see this stuff and when you dig in and you realize sometimes there's very little to it. So I'm hopeful that, now that we have this movement, we make sure that we have this movement towards ethics, that we make sure it's done in an ethical way. And I think that's a challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Lisa,
definitely.
you actually asked this question about what is trust and verify. We're talking about trust and verify. Suki, I can bring you into this because I said the other day, we received the Standard Charter, questionnaire and audit document in terms of what we're doing as a corporation in emissions and so forth. So I think, from my point of view, you're right. We got to be careful that, the greenwashing word is the worst word I can think of, but and green wishing might be just as bad. But it's going to be trust and verify for some period of time here. And just like financial statements are audited, there's going to be requirements. Then this is now over in your realm. So
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about just like a very small, easy to do task of like redefining capitalism, essentially, and acknowledging the inherent tension here between, we don't want to make this performative, right, by any means. But in order to do that, we're going to have to take a really hard look at our baseline assumption that unlimited and constant extraction, expansion, and consumption is our goal, and acknowledge the context that we're all in the material world, and redefine perhaps what success looks like, or what our baseline goal is, and what it really means to do business. Small point, but yeah, I mean, that's the only way, right, to get to something that isn't performative, is to actually redefine some of our baseline goals and assumptions.
Well, part of it is also, I think, you see in the discussion of the shift from do no harm to do good.
Yeah, I think the industry also is we have the catalyst of the smaller, very ethical, very passionate groups of jewelers, like the Ethel Metalsmiths people, that this is as important to us as an industry, as probably far more important than anything the SEC could promulgate at this point in time. The fact that this is a very important, very passionate, very visible movement to do the right things, and I believe it's working.
But I have a follow-up to that I'm really passionate about, which is that we also don't want to create a world in which it's easy for the really, really large companies to do this. We need a path to success for the small and medium-sized enterprises too, that are the backbone and the heart of this industry. And if they get excluded from this because it's too complicated and expensive, we've really not accomplished much, I think. And so I think the complicated part is figuring out a way for these smaller size family businesses to stay in business and meet a standard that we all feel good about with responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really, really important point. That I think actually the last webinar I was doing with you, Lisa, DDI was mentioning that they were doing some kind of project, gold mining, ethical gold mining in the Yukon, and they needed to track it, and they couldn't get in Canada rather, and they couldn't get internet access. And they're like, well, if I can't get it in Canada, how can you get it in Africa? So yeah, I think you want this to be more than something that, big companies can do because they have big marketing departments and big budgets and fancy lawyers, and they know how to get around these things, but you want this to be accessible to all. And I agree that, something like ethical metalsmiths, I mean, I wasn't around when AGS was formed, but I could see that in 50 years, ethical metalsmiths being as important as AGS as far as, what this industry, the kind of guiding light for this industry as far as where it goes and how it looks at what it does and who it defines as its leading lights and leading members. So
I think big or small, businesses are, you said it earlier, Rob, are here to make money. I think that's now how you align your short-term, your long-term goals, how you align that in a way where you're making money in a way that's also dealing correctly with all the responsible practices that we've been talking about. And no one's saying one's exclusion for the other. It's very important to look at the ways you're going about making money and how can you improve upon whatever it is, the ecology, the social mores, and so forth.
I just read this really interesting article, and I would say this is kind of somewhat borne out by my experience. I wouldn't say it in every case, but they said that people at companies, sometimes companies that describe themselves as ethical or make a big deal about being ethical, sometimes do some of the worst things because, and they cited some of this. There's a study that when people were given a task and they said, well, do this task to accomplish a social goal, right? People were more likely to cheat, right? Because they said, okay, I'm doing good, so I'm going to cheat, right? So I think that is somewhat of a danger. I mean, I consider myself an ethical journalist, but I don't go around saying I'm ethical, right? I just do my job, and I hope that people find it ethical. And I think that's, it can't just be a branding thing. It has to be kind of a day-to-day living thing.
And we see this with the luxury brands, the European luxury brands, when we have these conversations with them. There's really just like, I mean, maybe now things are changing, but to their credit, this doesn't compute because they're like, well, we're a luxury brand. Like, of course we're doing this. Like, we would never be so tacky as to yell it from the rooftops. But of course, we tacky Americans don't understand that. But right, they're like, yes, of course, it goes hand in hand with the quality that we're delivering overall, that we would also take this into account. So that's a very, I think, interesting angle.
Well, I think part of
going back to where we sort of started out, the whole webinar, that it's almost as easy now to find out, how trustworthy a company it is as it is to find out the price of their products or the quality of their goods. I mean, that, it's becoming, and you're going to have that ability if you don't have it now. And yeah, you got to make sure that you're reading everything correctly and you're getting the right sources. But, I believe the information, the connectivity is also leading us to be able to judge companies fairly in terms of what you just said before, Rob. Are they really ethical, or are they just saying they're ethical? Which I call green wishing.
The perfect point to jump into some questions, and I'm going to flip between two screens because my printer broke. So technology, the need for technology. Do well-known U.S. brand names act as a guarantee in the absence of hallmarking in the United States? And the person, Peter Oakley, goes on to say that in the UK, the 4 assay offices act as guarantor and jointly police the output of small jewelry manufacturing firms. I wonder if you have thoughts regarding that.
You mean just the verification that, so in the US, right, we don't have hallmarking, but we have, if you stamp the Heritage, you also have to stamp your company's trademark as the verification that Heritage claim is correct. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
I think part of what the question is suggesting perhaps is, do the bona fides of the company act in lieu of a hallmarking process? And in other words, since we don't have hallmarking, does the provenance, the corporate provenance, serve as such? And that's a very large and complicated question. I
think it means less than it did, because we've certainly seen a lot of big names screw up. But I think it matters. Yeah, I think, the fact that if a company can say they've been around for 100 years and has a good reputation and people know it and their mother went to it and grandmother and stuff like that, I think that matters.
Okay, so here is another question. Trust is one of the 5 major elements concerning emotional attachments. Wow. How are you approaching emotional attachment with regard to this issue?
That's a very interesting question. And I mean, I think one of our go-to sayings within industry, right, is the acknowledgement that our industry is very much based on emotion. So I think it's essential. I'll leave it to another panelist to go further, but that's an extremely, extremely interesting question.
I think about it from some of the analysis that I do, and the fact that in countries like India and China, they have such a well-established secondary market for gold jewelry, whether it's bangles or necklaces or rings. And if they're going to a new event and they need a new piece, it's okay to upcycle a piece that you had and put it into a new format. Whereas across Europe and US, we have greater attachment, greater sentimental values attached to our jewelry pieces, whether it's a wedding ring or a necklace or a bracelet that someone gave to us, that has much more meaning. So I think the emotional side to it maybe depends more so on which location you're based on and what your cultural attachment is to those various pieces. Whereas in some countries, the concept of gold has great significance, cultural importance, but it doesn't have the same emotion attached to it. But I'd say here also, you see it on the investment side as well. Sometimes holding gold is an emotional, when there's so much uncertainty in the world, whether it's financial risk or geopolitical risk, holding gold, I think, gives investors and consumers some confidence that they have this hard asset, this real asset that is no one else's liability. So it gives them some confidence and some trust. So I think with the market as a whole, especially with gold, there is a lot of emotion involved in some of those decisions.
Yeah, we also dealt with this question when we were talking about instituting blockchain, in that we couldn't reduce jewelry to a few pages of code. That's definitely not what it's about. So there we looked at not only do you know that provenance, but there's a story every step along the way. And that story had to somehow be incorporated to bring the emotional attachment to the piece. It wasn't about the method, it was about the story.
And that brings us to another question, which is, how is blockchain being leveraged to close the loopholes between mine through cutting to selling? And in this particular instance, of course, the KP is being cited as not.
From my end, not well. That it's a program looking for some development, looking for a future. That from our end, there ended up being a lot of problems that we knew some of these going in, but we deal with an awful lot of small suppliers. We deal with an awful lot, hundreds, if not more than 1,000 subcontractors and things throughout the world. If we're going to really truly have a complete, documented, credible, with integrity blockchain supply chain, we needed to involve much more of our supply chain. And the interoperability issues of, just take a couple of big companies between us and De Beers, for instance. We are on different platforms. The cost of interoperability, that API for us, our languages to talk to each other, is substantial. So you've got a good concept. It's a little too soon. I do believe in the importance of it, and I think the continuing credibility of cryptocurrencies seem to be getting in the banking institution. Suki, you know more than me. Say that, yeah, that's a good technology. We haven't really found the right economics and the right use for it, but we will.
An answer that I'm going to provide to a question is the ESGs stand for, and anybody please feel free after this, environmental, social, and corporate governance. That is what ESG stands for. And these are goals that set standards that are becoming an increasingly important yardstick economically. But anybody else, please feel free to chime in. Question was literally, what are they?
Yeah, and if I could just add something, I think that a lot of people, because there is a climate crisis, are interpreting ESG in a very narrow way to mean environment. And when people talk about sustainability, they talk strictly about the environment, but there's also economic development and help for poor countries, and that's part of the UN sustainability goals. And you can't if we get rid of climate change and half the world is starving, you're not really gonna get anywhere. You're gonna just end up in the same place at some point. So yeah, so I mean, I think what people need to clarify is that the environment is important, and I agree climate's going to be huge, but it's just one of a bunch of things that people need to be thinking about as we try to get to a better place.
Yeah, Rob makes an important point. Really, ESGs is more execution of the SDGs. That if you really look into the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, it's much broader than the environment and all the human rights issues, DEI and gender equality and so forth, that are brought into the SDGs. They more set the path for where your ESGs should be. And each company, I think, will determine the most relevant ESGs for themselves based on the materiality of those things to their business and to their communities and to their workforces.
And while some of them might be more of a priority, I think they are a web and not a set of binary choices. So we have to sort of speak to all of them to some extent.
And undergirding all of them is also how they're pursued and how we treat one another in pursuing the realization, because that too is part of, if you will, the landscape or the schema of the SDGs. This has been an extremely provocative conversation, and there's obviously food for a great deal more discussion. I think one of the things we know is that the push towards certification demonstrates that there's a lust for trust, as has been said. But having said that, at the same time, I think for us all to have our eyes on the on a higher love, or the lodestar that I think guides each one of our panelists today in terms of their activities and their corporate endeavors. I'm very grateful to each of them for participating. I'm very grateful that you took the time to be with us today. You can access a replay of this webinar or invite others to do so. It will be up within the next day. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for the trust you place in us. Wishing you all well. For many, actually for all of us, fall is a sense of renewal. It's a new year, whether it's a new year in terms of a calendar or a new year in terms of the rustling leaves and back to school. There's always a sense that fall brings with it beginnings, and we look forward to the year to come with all of you. Thank you very much. Take good care.
RobBatesAuthor.com. Bye, man.
Thank you, everyone. What he said.